Okay, so I'm here with Marshall Ferrin. He's the script writer behind Death of a Revolutionary. Congratulations, welcome to our festival in Brussels.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet
Glad
you.
to be here.
Thank you. So yeah, if you can just, I obviously do know what it's about, but for the sake of anyone that may be watching this, the synopsis, please.
Very good. This story is about a brilliant and driven French revolutionary that has the ability to write a new chapter in his country's rich history. But what begins as a battle for liberty, equality, and fraternity becomes a vindictive quest for supremacy, money, and power.
Thank you. You read that as though you were reading it off a script. Brilliantly done.
There you are. Thank you very much. You know, it's what they call the log line. Anyway, synopsis as follows. The story starts in Paris, France, in the year 1794, at the height of the French Revolution. Now, this French Revolution against an oppressive monarchy moves to remove all traces of the old regime. What began as this struggle for liberty, equality, fraternity has exiled or imprisoned early supporters, such as George Washington's General Lafayette and the American activist Tom Paine. Now, what is called the Reign of Terror is depicted in this story, and it is at its height. The radical government of France has just executed both left and right wings of the revolution. But a new threat comes from the center, led by George Danton, who advocates as the leading revolutionary of his time, who sees the way things are going. He advocates tolerance, moderation, and wants to transition the revolution from a continual state of conflict to build a real republic. Now, Danton created the terror. In the name of national unity, his followers murdered thousands of royalists. Depressed by all this bloodshed, Danton turns against the monster that he created. Yet, extremist leaders, backed by a radicalized population, demand the elimination of all real and imagined enemies of the people at any cost. That's where we begin the story.
Thank you very much for that. Immediately, what's interesting is most people that have any clue about the French Revolution will have heard of Robespierre, but Danton lesser so, and that's just the way it is. You know, you hear Robespierre mentioned all the time, but yet Danton is still a major player within the French Revolution. I wonder why he's not known as well as Robespierre.
Well, probably because Robespierre initially prevailed in his conflict with Danton. Robespierre became the dictator of the French Revolution as head of this Committee of Public Safety, which every day presented a list to the French Parliament, known as the Convention, for elimination of real and imagined enemies of the revolution. And Danton, which was the leading figure, became eclipsed by him as the revolution became more and more radical. You see, you don't hear about Danton for another reason, in that he was the voice of moderation and tolerance, but people seem to be attracted to more extremist voices to a certain extent. So these reasons are there as to why Danton doesn't get enough attention, which he really should, because he was your real last best hope for the revolution taking a more positive direction and not just eliminating people who happen to have a difference of opinion.
And without getting too much away, because again, most people know the history of Robespierre, he didn't have a great ending himself, did he?
No, he, as Danton's principal antagonist, he though may have initially prevailed over Danton, but several months later, as Danton predicted, as other people did predicted, that he followed him, Danton, to the guillotine.
Yes.
The reason why, of course, is that finally the rather sheep-like National Assembly of France, otherwise known as the Convention, finally woke up.
They'd had enough, I guess, hadn't they?
And, well, he started, this Robespierre, to eliminating even more real or imagined political opponents. And the people who were there were thinking, well, am I next? Am I ready to be
so they're
following
preempting?
Danton to the... will I be following down onto the guillotine? And will more of my colleagues follow me? So they finally rose up after being given, they thought, an advanced list of those who were to be executed. And people said, am I on the list? I've heard I'm on the list. And then the group of the deputies in the French National Convention rose up and they basically said enough is enough, and the next person to go is Monsieur Robespierre.
It must have been a terrifying time to have lived. I know we talked about this yesterday, but you said something that was quite interesting, because when we were chatting, as I said, away from the camera, you suggested, if you don't mind me using that word, that kind of revolution could happen even today, even within what we would call the cultural West. Or am I incorrect? I mean, just explain what you mean by that.
Well, you know,
are the elements in place? I guess.
First off, we saw this happen in the Russian Revolution in 1918, and we've seen it happen in various aspects of the Chinese Revolution over time. But yes, it could happen today quite easily, because when you have for example, the rise of the radical left in the United States at the moment, you see them pushing all the members of their particular party into further and further extremist views, and no one can be apparently more extreme in advocating certain positions than the other. And you see this whole tendency, this whole progression of moving more and more and more forward into expressions of anger at real and perceived ruling class people, such as large corporations, for example, and how to deal with it. Well, one solution, is to take their money is not good enough. For some others who say, well, not only we'll take some of their money, we'll take all of their money. And another group will say, well, now we've taken all of their money, we'll take anything they've got left in terms of hard assets. We'll decapitalize them because they're the enemy, the people who have a lot of wealth. So you can see this kind of progression happening step by step, piece by piece. And remember, the French Revolution started out quite modestly in modern terms, where they established, with the King's agreement, a constitutional monarchy, very much like we have in the UK.
UK, yeah.
Well, that wasn't enough for some people.
So it had been decided
that did not go far enough.
So sorry to interrupt. So does that mean, so for instance, the UK, I'm sure you're well aware of this, the monarchy is basically a figurehead.
Yeah.
They don't make any laws or enact. Yeah, it's all the decisions are made in Parliament, and they're just there to rubber stamp it. Is that kind of what had been proposed by the French government of the time?
Yeah, the French revolutionaries at the time, which were basically a lot of middle class people at the time, such as Monsieur de Lafayette, who back from America and became a leading figure there. In the early days, their idea was to have a figurehead king, and the National Assembly would be your parliament, just like you have in the UK again, and they would run the whole show, and the king would not
get involved in
with really substantive policies. Now, I'll say this: it turns out that Louis XVI, he didn't really like this arrangement very much, as you can imagine, and he did decide that he and his family were going to flee to another country. And of course, that triggered off a very negative reaction amongst the members of their parliament, the National Convention, and of course the people.
And it led to,
and of course, this one thing sort of led to another. They figured they couldn't trust the king to live up to his promise to be basically to reign and not rule, as they say. And that gave fodder to the more radical elements saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have a king anyway. Let's not have a king. And that's where where the whole problem started, where everything became more radicalized.
And it got worse and worse, of course.
Well, and eventually they decided that they were going to force the king to abdicate, which he did, but that wasn't enough. They had to figure out that it would be better just to eliminate him.
Which they did, of course.
Which they did, and they figured if you can kill the king, you can kill anybody.
Oh my word.
Basically, that was the idea.
So how long have you been interested in this slice of history? Has it been ongoing? Was it in the last? I imagine you've always been interested in history, but in this particular segment or
well,
time.
This particular segment, it's been in the last 4 months or so. I kind of felt that that having watched what was happening in the United States and around the world, that there needed to be some kind of a story to educate and to inform and most particularly entertain people with the notion that this kind of rise at the radical left needs to be examined, it needs to be shown as to where it can lead, and people need to be aware that if they go down this road, be careful what you wish for, because you might have a very, very bad situation there that you never envisioned. It's been about 4 months I've been working on this project. I'm glad to say it's sort of taken off, and it's been recognized in about 5 different film festivals and screenplay competitions. So we'll see.
No, you've
how
done
far
really
it can
well.
go.
You've done really well. Was it always? Did you always envisage it being a screenplay, or did you start off with the idea of it being a book?
Well, this is a pre-existing story out there that basically I've dramatized, and I always thought it would be a very good, either a 1-hour TV drama, or, and this is where it's been written as well, as an episode in a mini-series to give the larger context. It can work as it is, and that does now. It has a beginning, middle, and end, but it has a cliffhanger ending, and we are now can move forward into additional episodes, and we can bring additional episodes up front. So it's working on in 2 different, shall we say, areas of media, TV drama on one hand, or mini script episode on the other.
And was your profession always writing? Was it something you've grown into?
No, I was in international work, international development assistance. I've worked in over 30 countries around the world, and worked in the area of basically small and medium-sized enterprise development, helping small business people advance their firms worldwide.
Right. Okay.
Working for development organizations, for example, like U.S. Agency for International Development, and other ones, United Nations, and so forth.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds very interesting. But you've always been interested in writing, I guess.
Yes, always, ever since I was at university and afterwards. And then I took it up again in 2003. I wrote about 3 or 4, about 3 original and 1 non-original from another story screenplays, about 4. And then I took a break, a rather long break, and then I went back to it, and I said, I'm going to go back to it, not only because I'm inspired by the current events and able to write a piece that will reflect upon them. I wanted to do a story that was out there and basically give it another take, another interpretation, give it a more expanded vision for the audience to enjoy.
Yeah.
So this is what I found out. I finally realized, it takes a while, that most of the films or the television programs out there are from pre-existing stories, either in the public domain or from a novel or a book or a magazine or something like this. This is a story that's been out there since, well, it happened in 1794. I think if you dramatize it and you make it, you add some aspects to it to amplify its message, it might be something that people would like to watch and enjoy.
And are you, it's a silly question because I know you've completed it, but are you completely happy with the finish? Because writers always seem to be tinkering, but are you at a place now where this is the sign off and this is the finished? I mean, I know if it gets made, there'll be tinkering, of course, but I'm talking about the one you now have. It's everything you want it to be? Yes,
I think so. I think it's the latest version, which I think, version of the original script that I wrote. It's about in version number 7 or 8 now. And yeah, I think for the time being, I think it is the one that should be strong in the marketplace, let's put it that way. Which, as you say, of course, it's going to be open to modification based on whoever wants to produce it. But yeah, right now I think it's good to go.
And I know we're talking about Death of a Revolutionary, but I'm guessing you've got other work in progress that's unconnected with this?
Yes, I mean, well, we have, of course, the other 11 episodes of this one. I have to, I've already mapped them out. I have to actually write them, which is not going to be a problem. So we got that. And we have another 2-season miniseries on the American Indian, which I'm working on conceptually right now as to how actually structure the story.
Yeah.
I do want to finish this one first, but I can work on both simultaneously. But at this point, yes, a 26 two-season episode story on the American Indian in North America and Canada, and do something there in their story, still a good part of their story, to give people a real sense of what the American Indian was about in terms of their activities, their culture, and mainly focusing on their resistance to essentially an invasion from another continent. How did the American Indians resist, and what did they do, and what happened in the end, and how long were they able to keep it alive, their resistance. So it will be about their story in resisting the invasion from another continent, as they say, and we'll see how they approach the advent of these invaders. So we're going to give American Indian his very much his and her due here in terms of their effort to prevail or to survive the kind of problems that they faced when they were all of a sudden in a situation under threat.
Sounds brilliant. A bit of a quirky question this. So if you suddenly had the ability to go to any timeline that existed, would it be this timeline, or where would you go and who would you meet?
I don't understand in terms of timeline, in terms of
any point in history that you could go to in the last 500 years. Where would it go? Would it be here?
Yeah, I think being a student of history for quite some time, I think this would be really the one that would be on one of the top items on my list in terms of historical periods.
And if you could only meet one person, who would it be? Not necessarily out of these two, but
no. Well, in this particular case, I would probably want to meet. Actually, the person I would really probably want to meet is Danton. To see if I can give him some advice. For the presumptuous.
Well, I can say, listen, mate.
I mean, in the great altogether, the person I would really like to meet in history is to go back and meet Jesus. That would be actually my number one.
A lot of people.
If I couldn't meet Jesus, I would like to meet Monsieur Danton here and sit with a translator and to make it so I could get it right, and just talk about what he needed to do to get a win out of this, But it's an interesting hero. I must me if I can digress on this. This is a very interesting hero, not unlike one that you will see presented, I think, in theatrically, because this is the one that tries really hard to do this area and bring this revolution under control, but he essentially becomes exhausted by the effort, and as try as he might, he kind of drops the effort towards the end of the story to a certain extent, and it's a complex hero, and you don't get that very often in many of the films or the plays. Either he's going to go to the moon and then get struck down, or he's going to win, but there's no kind of in-between aspect of your leading character in a story, and this one is that kind of a hero, and it's therefore quite interesting, I think, for the audience to actually see this, and it's quite close to real life in that respect. People are never totally black or totally white. There's lots of gray on there, and this is a rather gray hero.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Marshall.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Appreciate it.
No.
And thank you for Fusion International.
Thank you. You're more than welcome. That's wonderful.